The US's war with Iran is likely to start again in the next 7 days. I want to go into why that is the case. The main reason is that Trump wants everything from Iran. He wants Iran to surrender. So he wants zero enrichments. He wants the 60% enriched uranium to be given to the US. He wants no long-range ballistic missiles that can attack Israel. And now he wants the Strait of Hormuz to be opened, with the US not giving Iran any concessions. So not returning Iran's more than 20 billion of frozen assets, not removing sanctions. Why would Iran agree to something like that? Trump thinks Iran is in such a weak position that they're just going to concede on every point. Before the war started, Iran made a lot of concessions. They agreed to zero enrichment of uranium, as was confirmed by Oman, who was part of the negotiation, was the mediator of the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. This was before the war that started on the 28th of Feb of this year. But now everything's changed. Not only did Trump attack Iran while they were negotiating, which means for the Iranians, they can't really trust anything that the U.S. says, but Iran now has the Strait of Hormuz. And with the Strait of Hormuz, they have control over 20% of the oil, the global oil. And with the controlling the volume, they can control the price of oil and cause damage, economic kind of warfare on Europe and the US in the same way that Europe and the US have applied sanctions on Iran. So when Trump comes out and says they've agreed to everything, I mean, just think about it logically. Why would Iran agree to everything without getting anything? That makes zero sense. It's obvious that Trump is lying. People think that Iran is in a desperate situation simply because they agreed to a ceasefire. But the reality is that they agreed to a ceasefire after the U.S. was begging them for a ceasefire and agreed to the 10-point plan that Iran gave to the U.S. to be the workable basis of the ceasefire and hopefully an end of the war. That 10-point plan gave Iran everything. In Iran's view, they believe they are the winners because America failed in the regime change. Iran still has the missile cities under the mountains they have because no bomb can penetrate 500 meters deep of mountain to attack those cities. Iran destroyed a lot of the U.S. bases in the Middle East. And Iran believes that it has deterrence because anything that the Israel and the U.S. does to the infrastructure of Iran in terms of energy or steel production or oil, Iran is able to do to the Gulf areas that they see as helping the Americans and Israelis to carry out their attacks on Iran. So they see that as deterrence. So for Iran's view, they still have their missile capability. They still have their launchers. They still have thousands of drones. They're able to export their oil to this day. You know, they export about 2 million barrels of oil a day at $100, which is actually kind of the price they're getting. You know, when you see $90 on the screen on the markets, that's the paper price, the real price, i.e. if you go and try to buy a barrel of oil right now, it's about $140. So assume that Iran gets anyone buying Iranian oil gets a huge discount because it will be sanctioned, especially anything that it exports right now that's not floating in the sea, because the floating in the sea, the U.S. unsanctioned that. But anything that's being exported right now, you know, there's sanctions on it, so Iran has to give a discount on that. So say they're, getting 100. That's 200 million a day being made from by Iran for their oil, and then apply the toll fee that they're applying on any ships that transit the Strait of Hormuz, and you get more money there. So Iran is making more money than before because the price of oil has increased. It has thousands of missiles, and it's right now continuing producing missiles. So when they entered the ceasefire with the U.S., Iran sees it as they are the winners of the 40-day Ramadan war. And so they thought that the U.S. is going to enter the negotiation with some concessions compared to before the war, especially that now Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, which is a big asset that they've obtained through this war. But the U.S. just said to Iran, hey, we'll agree to make the 10 points that you gave. That pretty much means unfreezing of the assets, unsanctioning of the oil. Iran keeps the Strait of Hormuz. That was the 10-point plan, right? We'll work on that. The U.S. said that to Iran just so that we can get on to do the ceasefire and actually have a discussion with Iran. But the US was never really serious about the discussions with Iran in Islamabad that happened last week, because think about who they sent to those negotiations. They sent J.D. Vance, who doesn't have any experience in negotiation. And then they said Jared Kushner, who's a real estate person, and Woodcoff, who again is also a real estate person. These guys have no knowledge, technical knowledge about the nuclear agreements or anything like that. Iran sent a 70-person delegation. Iran came to the Islamabad negotiations with the idea that we have everything that we need here to make a decision, to enter into a memorandum of agreement, not obviously an agreement, like the JCPOA, which took years to enter into, but at least a memorandum of understanding that we can base the eventual agreement upon. J.D. Vance didn't have authority to enter into any temporary agreement. Neither did Jared or Woodcoff. J.D. Vance, as was confirmed, he had to continuously make those calls to Trump, to anything that the Iranians were asking about. J.D. Vance couldn't answer because he had to go and get confirmation from Trump, and apparently he also got some confirmation from Benjamin Netanyahu, which is insane for the vice president of the U.S. to get confirmation on things from Benjamin Netanyahu. But even when J.D. Vance just said, hey, we can't get into an agreement because Iranians are just not accepting our terms, that tells you there wasn't a negotiation. U.S. went in, tricked Iranians again to say, hey, we have we'll agree to your 10-point plan. But when they came to talk about it, U.S. was like, these are our terms. Accept them. And if you don't accept them, we're walking away. And that's exactly what J.D. Vance did. He walked away thinking that that's going to put pressure on the Iranians to come and make more concessions. But the Iranians are done with the concessions point. The Iranians believe that they have won a lot more assets than before the war. And so it's the U.S. that needs to make concessions, not the Iranians. But the thing is, one of the philosophies of Trump is attack, attack, attack. Never be on the defense, always be on the offense. And so Trump isn't going to make any concessions, even though the logical thing to do is to get into an agreement where you meet halfway. It's very obvious that Trump will say something to the Iranians, such as that, we'll accept the ceasefire in Lebanon. But then he talks to Benjamin Netanyahu, who tells him, we're not going to accept the ceasefire in Lebanon. And then he has to backtrack on that, and it takes, a week for that ceasefire to apply, but it doesn't apply to all of Lebanon, such as in the south. It can only apply to some areas. And the other thing is they agreed as part of the ceasefire for there not to be a U.S. blockade on Iran. But it seems like the U.S., even though it agreed with Iran on that case, is backtracking on this. And so this is the key thing. The U.S. has a blockade right now on any ships coming out of Iranian ports. The aim is to hit Iran's revenue, because the goal is if you destroy Iran's revenue of nearly $200 million a day being made from oil exports, then you hit Iran's economy. Then you can't pay for the missile production, for the salaries of employees, of the military, of intelligence. It becomes much harder to operate. And at the same time, it puts pressure on China, which is also one of the goals of the U.S. I mean, half the reasons, I'd say less than half, but a big chunk of the reason why the U.S. wants to destroy Iran, one is being for Israel, but two is to put pressure on China, because China buys a good amount of oil from Iran. And so you choke Iran, you choke exports to oil to go into China, and that becomes a bargaining chip for when Trump meets Xi in China in May, which is why I think they are going to go a step further now to put more pressure on the Iranians by invading Kharg Island. Kharg Island is an island in Iran where 90% of Iran's oil is exported from. It's not where Iran's oil is located, it's just where Iran's oil is transported to, where from ships come to that island and take the oil and exit through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, to put even further pressure on Iran, the problem is with the blockade, you could only do so much because it requires a big navy and a lot of force to transact or, stop every transit ship that comes out, to kind of have men land on the ship and seize it, to stop it. Are you going to do that also with Chinese ships? is America going to do that with Chinese ships? Because that would really escalate things with China. The easier thing to do would be to take Kharg Island, which is where 90% of the Iran's oil is exported from. So instead of kind of dealing with a big land mass of sea, where a big mass of sea where the U.S. Navy has to kind of really go all over the place to intercept any ship that's coming out from Iranian ports. In a lot of instances, it's easier to just take over the source of the oil, which is in Kharg Island, where the oil is exported. Now, this is going to be a very difficult mission. I don't think it's going to be very difficult to acquire the island. U.S. has a lot of air power. It can do a lot of damage to the assets that defend the island. It could, what it will do is, first of all, it will jam the equipment on the island so that there's no communication between that island and, the command in Tehran, and kind of throw a lot of Air Force at that so that it could destroy a lot of the defense systems, which is already done. It's done it in the previous attacks, but it will continue to do that. The problem isn't acquiring the island, but the problem is, what do you do when you call the island? Because then you're sitting ducks. You've got, say, 1,000 U.S. soldiers on the island. Well, you're going to be open to all sorts of attack from Iran, from drones to cruise missiles to hypersonic missiles. I mean, you could think about, I'm sure you have equipment that could kind of jam a lot of the drones, but you won't jam all of them. You've got apparently Iranian soldiers with mount pads that can shoot at the aircraft that are not susceptible to jamming by the U.S. equipment. I mean, I guess you can kill some of them with firepower that you have from helicopters and from airplanes. But then the hypersonic missiles that are all across the coastline of Iran, you could destroy some of those launchers, but you're not going to destroy all of them. And some of them are underground. Then you've got the cruise missiles. And so when you take all of that into consideration, it's almost like a suicide mission where U.S. soldiers are going to acquire the island, but holding it is going to be something else. And it's going to be one of the biggest missions that the U.S. has ever carried out in a span of essentially 48 hours. And so when will this happen? It's likely to happen by the end of 26th of April. I suspect it will happen by actually really the 24th of April, which is a Friday. Simply because the U.S. is currently waiting for the USS Bush, which is an aircraft carrier. It's now at the tip of Africa, and it will get to kind of the right positioning to carry out attacks on Iran around the 23rd, 22nd of April. And so possibly on the 24th of April, you're going to start seeing those attacks happen. Every day that the U.S. doesn't attack Iran, it becomes much more difficult to attack Iran. One, because of the temperature. It's reaching 35 degrees now. In a couple of weeks, it's going to reach 40 degrees. It's very hard to operate in such degree, weather like that, in terms of the U.S. military personnel finding it very difficult to operate. And then the equipment itself, once you reach 40 and then in summer it's 50, things are going to break down. So you need to do this as soon as possible. Number two, the ceasefire ends on Tuesday night, which is the 21st of April. And so once that ceasefire ends, you can begin. And the longer you wait, the worse the economic situation is going to get. Because remember, the Strait of Hormuz is still closed and hasn't been opened by Iran. And now Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. The economy is not getting about 10 million barrels a day of oil since the beginning of the war. About, say 7 to 10 million, depending on alternative routes that have been implemented. Next week is going to be the final deliveries of oil to a lot of countries. Those are since the war started, some of the oil that has been exported from the Gulf countries, it takes about 4 weeks to reach its destination, 4 to 6 weeks. And so by next week, all the oil that was floating at the sea is now going to be delivered. There's not going to be any more oil. And so you're going to find a lot of shortages happening all across the world. Not everywhere, because like places in America, they are a net exporter. Places like Russia, they export. So, a lot of countries will be fine, but you still will see prices really notch up even in those countries. And some countries won't even have, especially the East Asian countries that rely on Gulf oil. And so, you can't wait longer. If you want to limit the economic damage that's being done from this war, you've got to do it as soon as possible. And of course, every day that Iran's able to export its oil, it makes more money and there's less pressure on Iran. So from a U.S. perspective, they're thinking we need to do this as soon as possible. And so the window for that, really, when, the ship, the U.S. aircraft carrier, the third one, that is the USS Bush, joins the Abraham Lincoln and the Ford in that region, you can carry out those attacks. And that happens around the 23rd of April, 22nd, 23rd. By the 24th, everything is in position, essentially, and they can start those attacks. So I believe you're going to see an attempt on that to get Kharg Island and then to put more pressure on Iran. I don't think it's going to work the way that the U.S. expects, because I think Iran's going to throw everything at it. I think acquiring the island is going to be not extremely difficult. Holding the island is going to be something else, because once you have those U.S. personnel on that island, they're just sitting ducks. They're just going to be open to hundreds of attacks constantly without stop. Now, Iran needs to make sure that it doesn't destroy its infrastructure on that island, because that's, again, where 90% of oil is exported from. So it's going to be also difficult for Iran to attack U.S. soldiers on, Kharg Island in Iran without causing infrastructure damage. It has to be done in the right way. But I believe Israel's going to take the opportunity to attack a lot of the infrastructure of Iran whilst this attack is happening. And this is not going to be a one front attack on Iran. If this begins, it's going to be trying to seize the enriched uranium. It's going to put, you're going to see some air attacks on the infrastructure. And so it's going to be maximum pressure one last time before summer sets in, before, the midterm elections later start to kind of show up in terms of campaigns and things like that, advertisements. This is now. It's now or never. America has essentially 1 month to end this, and then they are out of leverage. Less than 1 month, because remember, Trump is going to go to China to meet Xi on the 14th of May. And so this war has to be ended by then. So it's slightly less than 4 weeks for that. Let me know your thoughts about whether you think this war is going to be restarted in the next week, in the next 7 days, or Trump is going to try to do something else. If you did like this video, do hit the like and subscribe, and thank you very much.